Bullies slapped a disabled boy in a diner. Just an hour later, aggressive bikers stormed in. The afternoon light cut through the windows of Riverside Diner, casting long shadows across the checkered floor where laughter should have been the loudest sound. But today, the air carried something darker. At a corner booth sat Ethan Parker, 15 years old, his wheelchair positioned against the wall like he was trying to disappear into the faded vinyl. His burger sat untouched on the plate before him, a barrier between himself and the world that never seemed to stop testing him. His jaw was set firm, his eyes forward, but the slight tremor in his fingers gave away what his face refused to show. The boys at the booth across from him didn't just mock him. They made a performance of it. Tyler Anderson, tall and broad-shouldered with a smile that looked more like a sneer, stepped closer until he towered over Ethan's chair. He shoved his face inches from Ethan's, his breath hot with arrogance. Then Tyler's hand rose, palm open, ready to deliver a humiliating slap that would echo through the diner and through Ethan's memory for years. The other boys, Dylan, Chase, and Cameron, leaned in with hungry eyes, waiting for the spectacle to begin. The diner didn't move. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman with her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips looked away. A man reading the newspaper slowly folded it closed but kept his head down. The waitress, carrying a tray stacked with plates, stopped in the aisle, her feet rooted to the floor by something stronger than gravity. Fear. Everyone felt it. No one acted on it. If you believe that courage means standing up when others won't, that protecting the vulnerable is everyone's responsibility, and that no person deserves to be degraded for simply existing, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can prove that strength isn't about size. It's about character. Ethan's life had been an endless series of adjustments. Born with a condition that stole his ability to walk, he'd learned early that the world wasn't built for people like him. Not just the buildings and sidewalks, but the attitudes, the stares, the casual cruelty disguised as jokes. His parents had raised him to be strong, to hold his head high no matter what. But strength was hard to find when your tormentors stood over you, demanding you break. A man in a booth nearby cleared his throat, half standing as if to intervene. But when Tyler's crew turned their eyes on him, cold and challenging, the man sat back down, his courage evaporating. He muttered something to his companion, shaking his head, but did nothing more. It was the same story Ethan had seen a dozen times before. People cared, but not enough to risk themselves. Tyler's smirk widened as his hand hovered in the air. The boys behind him started to chant, low and rhythmic, building anticipation for the moment of impact. Ethan closed his eyes, his throat tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. He thought of his mother's words that morning. "Be brave, sweetheart. Just one more day." He tried to hold on to that, tried to let it anchor him through the storm of humiliation about to crash over him. All he could do was endure. All he could do was survive the next few seconds and pray that this nightmare would pass. Then, an hour later, the world shifted. It started as a rumble so deep it seemed to rise from the earth itself. Heads turned toward the wide front windows as the sound grew, transforming from distant thunder into something unmistakable. The roar of dozens of motorcycle engines. The parking lot filled with chrome and black leather as bike after bike rolled in, their riders moving with precision, parking in a formation that looked almost military. Patches on their backs caught the light. Skulls, wings, and words that carried weight. These weren't weekend riders. These were men who lived by their own code. The bullies' laughter faltered. Tyler's hand, still raised, slowly lowered as his eyes tracked the movement outside. The diner, already silent, became suffocating in its stillness. Every patron knew what was about to happen, even if they didn't know why. The door swung open with a force that made the bell above it sound like a warning siren. Jake "Ironclad" Thompson walked in first, his presence filling the space before he even spoke. His leather vest was decorated with patches earned through years on the road, his graying beard framing a face carved by experience and hardship. Behind him came Mason Steele Carter, all muscle and ink, and Zane Grizzly Walker, whose size alone made grown men reconsider their choices. One by one, the bikers filed in, their boots heavy on the tile, their eyes scanning the room with the efficiency of predators assessing prey. Tyler's smirk vanished. His crew, so bold moments before, suddenly looked like children caught stealing. But the bikers weren't looking at them yet. Ironclad's gaze found Ethan first, and something in those hard eyes softened just enough to be noticeable. Without a word, he moved forward, his crew following in formation. They positioned themselves between Ethan and the bullies, a wall of leather and muscle that radiated a single unmistakable message: this ends now. For the first time since Tyler had cornered him, Ethan felt something other than fear. It was small, fragile, but undeniably there. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally decided to stand up for him. Tyler Anderson had the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable, the kind that said he knew he could get away with anything. He was 17, broad across the shoulders, with hair gelled back like he'd stepped out of some old movie about rebels without causes. But there was nothing romantic about Tyler. He was cruel for sport, and today, Ethan Parker was his entertainment. Dylan Marsh flanked him on the left, shorter but wiry, always the first to laugh at Tyler's jokes before anyone else caught on. Chase Bennett stood to the right, thick-necked and dull-eyed, the muscle who never questioned orders. And then there was Cameron White, hanging back slightly, filming everything on his phone with a grin that promised this humiliation would live forever online. They moved as a pack, circling Ethan's booth like wolves who'd found prey separated from the herd. Tyler stepped forward first, his boots scraping deliberately across the tile. He leaned down, one hand gripping the back of Ethan's wheelchair, the other reaching out to shove Ethan's face to the side. The gesture was casual, almost playful, but the violence behind it was unmistakable. Ethan's head snapped back from the force, his neck straining. He tried to hold Tyler's gaze, tried to show he wouldn't break, but his heart was racing so fast he thought it might burst through his chest. Tyler's hand rose slowly, deliberately, palm open and ready. The slap was coming, and everyone in the diner knew it. The diner had become a theater of cowardice. At the counter, a middle-aged man in a business suit stared intently at his coffee cup as though the dark liquid held answers he desperately needed. His knuckles were white around the handle, but he didn't turn around. He didn't want to see what he already knew was happening. 2 booths away, a mother pulled her young daughter closer, whispering something urgent in her ear. The little girl's eyes were wide, confused, but her mother pressed a finger to her lips and turned her head firmly toward the window. "Don't look. Don't get involved. Don't make it our problem." The waitress, Maria, stood frozen near the kitchen door, her order pad trembling in her hand. She'd worked at Riverside Diner for 12 years, had seen fights and drama and heartbreak, but this was different. This was deliberate cruelty, and she knew if she stepped in, those boys would turn on her next. She was 62. She couldn't afford to lose this job, couldn't afford to be their target. So she stood there, hating herself, doing nothing. An elderly couple at the far end exchanged glances, the man half rising from his seat before his wife's hand clamped down on his wrist. Her eyes pleaded with him. "Not worth it. Not our fight." Ethan saw it all. Every averted gaze, every turned shoulder, every person who chose their own safety over his dignity. He'd never felt more alone, more invisible, more disposable. The world had decided he wasn't worth the risk. The slap never came. Instead, Tyler pulled back at the last second, laughing as Ethan flinched, and flicked his forehead hard enough to sting. It was worse somehow, the restraint. It meant they weren't done. It meant this could go on as long as they wanted. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, trying to steady his breathing. His cheek burned where Tyler had shoved him, and his forehead throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation that wrapped around him like a blanket soaked in ice water. He wanted to scream, to fight back, to do anything but sit there absorbing their cruelty. But his body wouldn't cooperate. It never did. Tyler and his crew had moved back to their booth, but they weren't quiet about it. Their voices carried across the diner, loud and proud, recounting their bravery like they just conquered a mountain instead of terrorizing a kid in a wheelchair. "Did you see his face?" Dylan crowed, slapping the table. "Thought he was gonna cry." Cameron played back the video on his phone, and they huddled around it, laughing at Ethan's fear immortalized in digital form. Ethan closed his eyes, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He thought of his mother's face that morning, kissing his forehead before he left. He thought of his room, his safe space, miles away. "Please," he prayed silently. "Please let this end. Let me disappear. Let this hour pass." The rumble started low, almost subsonic, a vibration that seemed to rise through the floor itself before anyone consciously heard it. Conversations faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Tyler's laughter died mid-sentence as heads turned toward the windows. The sound grew, transforming from a distant hum into a thunderous roar that made the glass panes rattle in their frames. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. The parking lot filled with chrome and black leather, engines growling in a synchronized chorus that felt less like transportation and more like a declaration of war. Ethan's heart, which had been hammering with fear, now pounded with something else. Confusion. Hope. Terror. He didn't know what this meant, only that something had changed, that the air in the diner had shifted from stagnant dread to electric anticipation. The engines cut off one by one, leaving a silence that was somehow louder than the noise had been. Through the window, Ethan could see men dismounting, their movements precise and purposeful. Leather vests. Patches. Tattoos that covered arms like armor. Then the door burst open with such force that the bell above it didn't jingle so much as shriek. The frame shook. Every eye in the diner snapped toward the entrance. Tyler's smirk faltered. Dylan's laugh caught in his throat. Chase and Cameron froze, suddenly looking very much like the children they were. Someone much bigger had just walked in. Jake Ironclad Thompson filled the doorway like a force of nature given human form. He stood well over 6 feet, his shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon light streaming in behind him. His graying beard was thick and wild, framing a face carved by decades of hard roads and harder decisions. His eyes, steel gray and sharp as razors, swept across the diner with the efficiency of a man who'd learned long ago to assess threats in seconds. Behind him came Mason's steel carter, all muscle and ink, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories of battles fought and won. His shaved head gleamed under the diner lights, and when he cracked his knuckles, the sound echoed like gunshots in the sudden silence. Zane Grizzly Walker entered next, living up to his name in both size and presence. He was a mountain of a man, his beard streaked with gray, his leather vest straining against shoulders that looked capable of moving cars. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but they held a weight that made grown men reconsider their life choices. More followed. Diesel. Raven. Hammer. Each one a study in controlled aggression, their boots heavy on the tile, their presence expanding to fill every corner of the diner. They moved with purpose, with unity, a brotherhood bound by something deeper than blood. The air itself seemed to compress under the weight of their arrival. This wasn't a social visit. This was an intervention. Ironclad's eyes found Ethan first, and in that single glance, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. A silent promise that whatever had been happening was about to end. Without a word, Ironclad moved forward, his crew following in perfect synchronization. Their boots struck the tile in a rhythm that sounded almost military, purposeful and relentless. They didn't rush, didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to pot the diner like a wave splitting water. They positioned themselves around Ethan's booth with tactical precision. Mason stepped to the left, his massive frame blocking Tyler's direct line of sight. Zane moved to the right, arms crossed, creating an impenetrable wall of leather and muscle. Diesel and Raven flanked the sides, while others spread out behind Ironclad, forming a semicircle that transformed Ethan's corner into a fortress. The shift was instant and absolute. Tyler's smirk dissolved like sugar in rain. His shoulders, which had been squared with arrogant confidence moments before, now hunched inward defensively. Dylan's face went pale, his earlier bravado evaporating as he realized how small he actually was. Chase took a half step backward, his thick neck suddenly seeming thin and vulnerable. Cameron's phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the table. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. Every swagger, every cruel laugh, every ounce of power they'd wielded over Ethan now felt like borrowed time they could no longer afford to spend. Ironclad turned slowly, his gaze settling on Tyler with the weight of a judge passing sentence. He didn't speak. I didn't need to. His eyes did all the talking, cold and assessing, measuring Tyler not as the intimidating figure he pretended to be, but as exactly what he was, a coward who picked on those who couldn't fight back. The silence stretched, becoming a living thing that wrapped around the diner and squeezed. Every second felt like an hour. Every breath seemed too loud. The tension was so thick it was almost visible, a pressure that made chests tighten and hearts race. Tyler tried to hold Ironclad's stare, tried to salvage some shred of his dignity, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered downward, then to the side, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. His hands, which had been so confident when raised against Ethan, now trembled at his sides. He understood something fundamental in that moment. These weren't kids he could intimidate. These were men who'd seen real violence, who'd lived through real conflict, and who wouldn't hesitate to remind him exactly how small he truly was. Dylan shifted nervously. Chase swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Cameron looked like he might be sick. Behind the wall of leather and muscle, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in hours. Safety. Protection. The icy grip of fear that had been crushing his chest began to loosen, replaced by something fragile but undeniable. Hope. Tyler broke first. His smirk, that cruel signature that had defined him moments ago, vanished completely, replaced by something raw and honest. Fear. He took a step backward, then another, his movements jerky and uncoordinated like a puppet with tangled strings. Dylan followed immediately, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to put distance between himself and the wall of bikers. Chase bumped into a chair, sending it scraping across the floor with a screech that made him flinch. Cameron scrambled to grab his phone, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped it twice. They moved as a unit toward the exit, but there was no coordination now, no pack mentality. Just four scared boys desperate to escape the consequences of their cruelty. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor, unable to meet the gaze of anyone in the diner. Not the patrons who'd watched them terrorize Ethan. Not the waitress who'd frozen in fear. And certainly not Ethan himself. The door seemed impossibly far away, each step an eternity of shame. The bikers didn't move. They held their formation like statues carved from stone, a silent barrier that remained until Tyler's crew stumbled out into the parking lot. Only when the door swung shut behind them, only when the threat had been completely neutralized, did the wall of leather and muscle finally relax. But they didn't leave Ethan's side. Ironclad turned slowly, and when his eyes met Ethan's, the hardness softened into something almost tender. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level, his massive frame folding in a way that made him less intimidating and more human. "You held strong, kid," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "That took guts. More than those punks will ever have." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to speak to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. All he could manage was a small nod. Ironclad gestured to Maria, the waitress who'd been frozen near the kitchen. "Bring this young man whatever he wants. Best thing on the menu." "It's on me." He pulled out a worn wallet, laying bills on the table with deliberate care. Then he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something small, a patch, weathered and faded, bearing the insignia of a skull with wings. He pressed it into Ethan's palm, closing the boy's fingers around it. "You carry this," Ironclad said quietly. "Anyone gives you trouble, you show them this. You're protected now. You're one of ours." Mason stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. Zane nodded with approval. The others formed a circle, a brotherhood that had just expanded to include a 15-year-old boy in a wheelchair. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan didn't feel alone. He was part of something bigger. He was family. If this story resonated with you, we'd be grateful if you take a moment to like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Linda's Hot Stories. Your engagement allows us to continue sharing meaningful stories that inspire. Before you leave, we'd love to hear from you. What did you learn from this story?